I think we're going to start. I'm going to start by introducing myself, and Debbie will introduce ourselves, and then we're going to ask you all a couple of questions. My name is Leslie Rogers. I'm actually a licensed clinical social worker and a psychotherapist. I have a practice in Norwalk where I see individuals.
Yeah, now I can't.
Now you can't hear me.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
A little better.
Can you hear me now?
The Verizon.
Just go like this or like this. Okay.
It's the fan from the projector.
Oh, from the projector? Oh, okay. Here, then hold it closer.
All right. I have a private practice in Norwalk where I see individuals and couples, substance abuse, and a lot of trauma. But more importantly, I've had the privilege over the last 15 years to be involved in a lot of positive youth development initiatives in the surrounding towns, to teach and facilitate parenting classes, parenting groups, and be part of underage drinking task force and all of those things that go on, and really to be in contact with parents who are kind and caring and really motivated individuals. Debbie, why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm Deborah Koenig. Can you hear me okay? And I live in Westport, Connecticut. I met Leslie doing positive youth development work. I'm an attorney by training. I'm actually now in training to become a marriage and family therapist because I seem not to be able to get enough of school. But I have 2 children. Leslie didn't talk about
I'll do mine.
And I've been through this process. I'm currently going through this process, so I can relate very well to what everybody's going through right now at all different levels. And I facilitated parenting classes for about 12 years, and I've written curriculum on things like female aggression and bullying in girls, and we worked on this class together. So hopefully we'll give you some good tips tonight for wending your way through all of this.
I actually have been through this. Oh, thank you. I've got somebody who's my manager. Okay, I've been through this process 5 times, and I'm still alive to talk about it. I have, and actually it's been through a period of time because I have stepchildren who are in their late 30s, and then my children are all in their 20s. So it's been I've seen it go from not quite as competitive to very, very competitive. How many of you have 12th graders? How many of you have 11th graders? 10th? 9th? Ooh, okay. And for how many of you is this your first child going to college? Okay, all right, okay. For Debbie and myself,
yeah, that's okay.
Yeah. As professionals working with parents and adolescents in a variety of settings, we bear witness almost daily to the spiraling stress experienced by kids and their parents as they go through this college application process. We see parents who are at their wits' end. We see administrators who are overwhelmed, and we see kids who are completely stressed out. And unfortunately, I think what alarmed us was that they became uncommunicative, and some of them very withdrawn and distrustful of the system and anybody who was associated with it. And so we really went about trying to figure out what we could do to tone down the volume on this whole process. The frenzy around the college process puts enormous pressure on everybody, from schools, administrators, communities, and families. And this includes siblings, by the way. It really has an effect on siblings. Colleges are seeing a drop in the self-esteem in kids, and unfortunately they're reporting waiting lists for appointments in their mental health clinics. What we are hearing from colleges is that we are sending children to college who are academically prepared but not emotionally prepared to take on the demands of the full college experience, including living away from home. And the clinics have waiting lists for counselors and for psychiatrists. So there's a dramatic increase in the demand for counseling services on college campuses, and often there are backlogs.
Just went forward.
So here's a quote by Michael.
Oh no, this is multiple choice.
Oh, did you saw the multiple choice, didn't you? Did you see the multiple choice?
No.
Okay. So relax and take a deep breath and leave preconceived notions home about the college process for the next hour. And I'm going to ask all of you to take a couple of very slow, deep breaths, in deep enough so that your belly actually goes out, and let it out. Take another one in, and another one out. And another one in, and another one out. Okay. How did we get here? What made the earth shift? In the 80s, there was a decrease in college-bound students, and it forced your top-tier schools to begin to compete for the first time with lesser-known schools. And when that happened, a generation of consultants sprang up, and at the same time, the media began to rank and compare colleges. And we cannot change this. Then come along, who are we? And I think most of us in the room might be baby boomers. We are the infamous baby boomers. We were born, most of us, between 46 and 1964. We were born into peace and prosperity. We were the product of social movements, civil rights, feminism, and the Vietnam War, television, the King and the Kennedy assassinations, Woodstock, Watergate, and sex, drugs, and rock and roll. We are idealistic, individualistic, and we are dedicated to self-improvement. We are competitive. We have high expectations of ourselves and our children. We enjoy our children, and we like our children's friends. We are involved in their lives, and we don't like to see them fail because we don't like to fail. And often we can feel like the college process is a report card for us. Our children are the millennials. There are 77 million of them. Born since '79, they have been raised in relative affluence by communities with boomer values about community and service. They like adults. They work well with adults. But they have also been the target of very sophisticated product marketing, especially by colleges and universities. They have been treated as special, and they are not accustomed to delayed gratification. Think of the fact that most of them have never heard a busy signal, used whiteout, or gotten up to change a TV station. Okay? Colleges are overwhelmed by applications, and our families are affected. We actually have a specially coined parenting style, which you all know about, called helicopter parenting. And loving, intelligent, and well-meaning parents are intervening in the day-to-day activities of their sons and daughters before college in a way that I don't think our parents ever intervened in our lives, which is both good and bad, but also sometimes when they go to college. So this trend raises questions about how parents can remain involved in their children's lives and help them to become independent, healthy young adults, while at the same time not becoming over-involved to the point of being counterproductive and potentially impeding our children's emotional maturity and readiness to leave home. It is important for our kids to go through this process, but we are in a bind. While the process has gotten out of control, we have children whom we like to help, but 4 years and an exorbitant amount of money is not to be taken lightly. So what we want to help you think about is, how do you help your daughter or son go through this process and come out the other side with a model and the life skills to use to approach other major or minor events in their lives as they go forward? What is the learning in this process for them and for us?
As you can see from this, slide, the most important part about it is when it was written, which was over 20 years ago. So this is not a new phenomenon. This is something that's existed for a long time. And in fact, when you read the articles by Dr. Thompson, they pretty much say the same things that we're hearing and reading in the newspapers today. So it's not that dramatically different, but I also think that there's more of a clarion call for people to pay attention to what the warning signs are with kids and what kind of stress they're under. So there's the parent's perspective and then there's the kid's perspective. And we have interviewed a lot of kids and we have a lot of quotes, but you know, and these are kids who are high school students. I haven't had a vacation since 3rd grade. I wish my parents had a hobby other than me. That's been said to me, although that's not my child who said it. All I want for my birthday is to be done with standardized testing. That was my son, who's a junior, whose birthday happens to be on June 1st. And he goes, I just want to be done with this. I just want to be done.
And who said, have you learned anything from this, Mom? From this curriculum that you've written?
Apparently not, so.
Could be worse.
Well, I think he thought it was going to change the system, but it hasn't.
Right.
So.
Right. One of the things that I wanted to talk to you about briefly was where your kids are developmentally right now. By definition, adolescence begins at the onset of puberty and ends when adult responsibilities are assumed. It's a very, very long period of enormous growth, which you all know. These kids are changing cognitively, they're changing morally, they're changing physically. Their brains are changing. I'm sure all of you know by now that the prefrontal cortex doesn't completely develop until the mid-20s, and that is the area of the brain that is in charge of impulse control, forward planning, organization. So if you were to hook your kids up to, let's say, a SPECT scan, you would not see any activity in the prefrontal cortex when you talked about 5 years from now. So we're fighting that battle too when you're trying to have them plan for their future. But the most important thing that's going on with them right now as they move from childhood into adulthood is that they're trying to figure out, who am I? And this is a very, very significant, important piece of development, okay? They are not thinking about it on a conscious level, but it is the most critical task of adolescent development. They are trying things on, they are throwing things out into the culture, they are seeing what sticks and what doesn't stick. They are trying to figure out what their values are, what they like, what they don't like, what of your values they want to absorb, what they don't want to absorb. They're really trying to get a sense of self. And I don't know about you all, but I wish I had gotten my sense of self when I was in my teens or when I was an adolescent, because I think it's one of the most important things that we can do for ourselves and for our children. The college process puts our adolescents in a bind because we're asking them to observe and evaluate who they are before they have actually had a chance to really develop a consistent self of themselves. At a time when they've been trying on personalities and exploring the world of adulthood, they are suddenly asked to manufacture an identity on a piece of paper. It's an identity that we call a paper cutout. The college process intervenes for up to 18 months in the midst of an unfinished journey. The psychologist Erik Erikson characterized the developmental task of adolescence as a time when a young person asks, who am I, and learns who they are as their self in relation to relationships. Our society fosters attitudes of competition and success, and this is not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing. But sometimes who am I gets intermingled with who should I be as determined by a college acceptance letter. Who am I based on what a group of people sitting around a table determine whether I am to be accepted or rejected. And they get a lot of rejections and a lot of rejection letters, a lot of them do. So our role as a parent is to give them the time and the space for this personality to evolve. Creating a safe haven at home can help this process. While the outside world is juggling, we, as much as we can, should be nurturing, okay? And we have to go through this process. Our kids mostly have to go through this process. And I think the best way to do it is to acknowledge that it's a bind, that we actually support our kids in the fact that they understand that this process is somewhat inauthentic. And Debbie's going to talk about that a little bit later.
One of the things that we do, is that better? Okay. One of the things that we do, we teach a 4-week class that's about the college process and helping parents to manage the stress associated with it. But we ask parents to do a reflection, which I'm going to ask you guys to do now. I'm not going to turn off the lights. I'm not going to ask you to close your eyes unless you'd like to. It's not very often during the day that somebody asks us to relax or close our eyes. But just to kind of think about these questions, because it helps put us where our kids are at. And kind of since we bring ourselves to this parenting, it's good to reflect on what our experiences were like. So take a few minutes and think about some of these questions. How did you define yourself as an adolescent? How much freedom did you have to make important decisions or set your own goals? Which decisions did you wish you had made independently? Were there decisions where you could have used more guidance? What were your family's expectations for you? What were your expectations for yourself and your future? How did you feel when those expectations were not met? And how did your family react? Did your family support you? And if not, how would you have liked them to have supported you? And when I say support, I'm talking about interacted with us, because a lot of us didn't have any interaction at all with our parents around those issues. Did you feel external pressure from school, friends, testing, competition? And how did you feel about leaving home? Can you think of an example or expectation in your life that didn't materialize the way you expected to, but had positive results beyond your original expectations?
What was it like to think about those questions for you all? Everybody looks very serious. Somebody going to be brave enough to say how? Pardon?
Confusion.
What was it confusing? Okay. Yep.
I don't think that back then there were the expectations for us that we have for our children now. I think our children now, I think growing up, our parents, we just sort of had a lot more freedom. We weren't micromanaged the way kids are now. And so I listened to those questions of yours, and I don't remember thinking any of those things. I just remember living in the moment and just sort of being free, and life just happened. And these kids today, just, everything they do has to have some kind of
Purpose.
some kind of outcome. Everything is so goal-oriented that I just think they can't often just relax. I think it's sort of a shame, but there's so much pressure on them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've done that with a number of people I've talked to where their experience was like the fall of their senior year. The parents said, well, where have you applied to school? Or where are you planning on, or where are you going? And that was the extent of it.
Right, right.
So there was no input at all.
And people who didn't go, not everybody was, we live in a community where a lot of people, majority of people do go to college. How about somebody else?
I mean, I find it very stressful, you know, I mean, what's going on now, there's just so much stress and, you know, pressure put on our kids, but like what everyone else said here, there wasn't much stress.
Yeah, it's different.
There also wasn't the same buildup. I mean, you know, it didn't start the second, I'll never forget when my daughter started high school, and she's in college now, but when she started high school, the principal of the school got up and he goes, it all starts here. I've been telling her 9th grade, you're going to get used to it, it's a transition, and the principal said, nope, it all starts, it counts from the second you walk in the door, and I'm like, great. Thanks so much for your support, for the message I'm trying to give my kids. And so I think it does, I think there is more pressure, and I think it starts earlier. So where somebody might ask a senior that when we were younger, it starts a lot earlier. So.
Anybody else before we go on? Have any reaction to any of those questions? Okay. Thank you for speaking up.
So, believe it or not, there are benefits to the college process that we may not have experienced because we were so kind of loosey-goosey and not being guided, many of us, in the process. So it's not a typo. But it can be a win-win proposition for the whole family. Kids can actually mature and become resilient as a result of doing this and going through this, kind of ready to tackle this interim step into adult responsibilities. I hesitate to call it adult responsibilities because when we were working on this curriculum originally, I did not have a college-age child. Now I have a college-age child who texts me every, detail of her life. So I'm not sure it's completely adult responsibilities yet. We're getting there. But there have been people who are concerned, and there are groups. There's actually a website. There's a man named Lloyd Thacker who got together something called the Educational Conservancy, and you can find some of this information that I'm going to talk to you about online. He did a survey of kids in 8 different communities, mostly big cities, but around the country, public school, private school, to kind of get a sense of how this process was impacting on children, what their perception of the process was, whether it was positive or negative, but also, what were kids learning about themselves. And so it's an interesting study. I think that the thing, I'll start with the negatives, which is that, and I don't like to focus on too much of the negative, but it's out there. The kids complain predominantly about a lack of authenticity, which is what Leslie was just talking about, that the process isn't authentic. For those of you who have younger kids, this isn't going to be as relevant if you haven't gone through this. But a lot of the kids say, one of the kids said, all the colleges say they're highly selective, and then they encourage us all to apply. It works for them. Doesn't work for us. It builds our numbers. We're making them highly selective by having so many people apply. And then one kid said, we wouldn't apply to so many colleges if they were honest with us and told us what they were all about and what they really wanted. So that really supports that feeling that these kids have of that inauthenticity. We're asking you to fill out lines on a form of all of the stuff you've done, and they feel inadequate when they haven't filled out every line on the form. And actually, as a result of that, I believe that some of the applications have eliminated 10 things for them to fill in and don't let them fill in as many. But I think that the salient point here is more that the kids kind of see that it's a sham. That some of this is a sham. Not all of it is, when you go and you get slick marketing materials, I'm sure some of you have been through that experience, they're just marketing materials. Just like they don't buy everything that they see on TV, and we don't buy it for them, it's something that they can learn to discern and kind of go through information and see, is this really for me? I know that's one thing that's very different for kids now that certainly when I was young is, I don't think my parents took me to see any colleges. Now it's like a whole different line item budget, for those kinds of things. And so I think that it's, and it's a little bit different in this area because some people can afford it better than others. In other places, they don't. I mean, there is some difference in other parts of the country. Also, we're accessible to so many schools because we're in the Northeast. So it can be a drive as opposed to a plane flight. So what can our children gain? And most people do not look at the college process as something that they can gain anything out of except for headaches and stress and pressure, and us too. So to respond to some of you also, this is stressful on us also, to watch them under so much pressure and stress and not being able to do anything about it is very disconcerting, and it's really not how we view our role as parents. You know, they skin their knee, we provide a Band-Aid. We can't fix this, and that's really frustrating and hard, and we need to go a little bit easier on ourselves. So kids can gain practical skills to learn independent and capable decision-making. That doesn't mean they make decisions in a vacuum. That doesn't mean they don't need guidance. But really, when they're on their own in college, they do need to make decisions on their own. And if we've stepped in and helped them make every single decision along the way, they can start to doubt themselves and whether or not they're capable. So we need to watch what messages we're giving them when we step in all the time. They can learn time management. I don't know about any of you, but it's a really interesting skill to watch with an adolescent, because my timetable is that it needs to be done. Their timetable is, Mom, I'm going to do it. When is something that I ask almost every day. When? Really? Is this really going to work? So, planning and organization skills with help. If you think about this, this is really overwhelming. They have so much, they really could use an executive assistant to get these applications out the door. And so
They have one.
They have one. They have several usually. But that planning and organization is a really important skills. Think about working, and think about working in a job where you have a project to do and you've got to organize it. It's really important for them to be able to take these steps. That doesn't mean they don't need help, but it means we need to kind of let them feel it out. Sometimes ask for help, or sometimes when you see them really stressed, to offer help. They can learn balance. The one thing that's really daunting about this process, and we do this in our classes, we ask adults to write down all the things that they are excellent at. And usually most people say, oh, we don't like this because it's not fun to think about what I'm good at and what I'm not good at. That's what these kids are learning to do. And it's hard to balance school and sports and community service and music lessons. And I mean, we're asking them to do things that actually I think most of us in the room probably wouldn't succeed at. So it's really important to get them to understand balance, that everything doesn't have to be extreme all the time. You can do a few things well, you don't have to do everything well. They feel like they have to do everything well. And then again, this is going back to this thing, discern, process, and evaluate information. We're talking about, they're getting a huge amount of information, and what's realistic, who's authentic, who's giving us information that we can rely on. The chatter at school, if anything in Darien, like it is in Westport, Connecticut, it's awful. And the kids, it's incessant, and there's no way, you know, who's a reliable resource? Is it a teacher? Is it my peer? So that's practical. And the emotional skills, self-confidence, ability to self-evaluate and be reflective. Those essays that you have to write, they got to do it, so you might as well learn how to reflect on who you are. Learning to live with uncertainty and ambiguity. This is probably the hardest part of the process, but it's a lot of life, and it's real, and it's part of how we grow up. Delayed gratification, a sense of their own accomplishments. This is truly their accomplishment. They've gone through 4 years of high school. They've done the sports. They've done the essays. It's their accomplishment, not ours. We heard a lecture once where somebody said, stop saying we are applying. We are not applying. Mm-hmm. They are applying. And knowing that his or her authentic self is okay. And those are the messages as a family that we can give them. It's not the admissions department of a college. It's not their job to tell our kids that they're okay. It's their job to determine whether or not they can meet the academic expectations of that institution and fulfill whatever mission they have. It's our job to tell our kids that they're okay no matter what the college says. And those are really important messages that we need to give our kids. So all of this is really the backbone of resilience. You've probably heard the word a million times. But it's the ability to face challenges and bounce back from adversity. And these are kind of the 7 core, competence, confidence, connection, character, contribution, coping, and control. And if we can send our kids off to college with that in their belt, I guarantee you there'll be a lot fewer text messages than I get, I hope. But I think that that's what the studies found, is that if we can give them the tools to be able to do this in a confident way, that they can come out resilient and actually be much more successful and maybe not in need of the mental health services at the school when they get there. And that's one of my favorite quotes. That sometimes not succeeding is as good a lesson as it is to succeed. Oh, I just did, oh, what did I do? Okay. So the bottom line is, the really important thing to remember is relationships last a lifetime, college doesn't. We want them to want to come home at Thanksgiving. We don't want to have made them so crazy that they don't want to come home, or that their parents have made their lives miserable. Home needs to be a safe refuge. I kind of mentioned that what goes on at school during the day is hard on them. To demonstrate compassion and understanding, sometimes it helps to take a deep breath when we hear a story from them that might upset us. Just to kind of sit back and hear what they have to say about it. We want to role model productive ways of managing stress. So if somebody comes home and says, I got a bad grade on a test, not to jump to the, oh my God, what does this mean? But to kind of hear what they think about it. And acknowledge, but do not get on the roller coaster. That roller coaster is partially the process that they're going through, but it's partially their brain development, their hormonal development. It's like that anyway. So they can vent and they can tell you those things, and if you get on the roller coaster, I guarantee you they'll move on and you will have a stomachache and not be able to sleep. Don't treat their last 2 years as the did you years. Did you do this, did you do that? It's really annoying. I'm conscious of it and I still do it. And I said, I just don't know how else to ask you if you've done something. You know, so you just want to be conscious of the fact that our conversation is not just about that. And you know, we need to stick with what we believe and the relationship that we formed with our kid, and that at the end of the day, if that's the question you can ask yourself, and every time you go through a piece of this process, that's always the best decision you can make.
Okay, so
Yeah. You can do it.
all right, so I'm going to actually just talk about some tools that you can use, because really our goal is to help our children go through this process and come out of it emotionally intact, and for your relationship with your children to be as strong at the end of it as it is at the beginning of it, and for them to not shut down, which is a lot of what we see happening. But we're going to start with the premise that the college process is an enigma to most of us, but it is not a crisis. It feels like a crisis. Our communities are sort of making it be a crisis, but it's not a crisis. I think we all know, what a crisis is. Some of the tools I'm going to give you, you have heard, but I want to remind you about them, because mostly we hear these tools when our kids are growing up and when they're young, but not so much as they get older. The first thing I'm going to remind you about is to listen to your children, okay? We must listen carefully to what our children are really saying. It is what gives us the message that we are worthy and competent, that somebody listens to what we're saying and doesn't argue, disagree, or try to fix. It makes us feel like the outside and the inside of ourselves is one cohesive unit. Listening to children attentively is more important, almost, than any words that you can say to them. That is what our friends do for us. That is why we like to spend time with our friends. They listen to us and they agree with us, okay? Young people often say, my parents never listened to me. They want us to listen to them and to respect them. They crave our attention even if they don't admit it. So try to listen with genuine sympathy. Simply having a sounding board helps them figure out their own problems. Don't interrupt, and let them finish their statements, okay? Turn off the parent alarm. Our rapid fire response is a reaction to what our children are saying, is often to direct them away from pain or trouble. I know what happens to us is that when our children are unhappy, or they have anxiety, or something is bothering them, we immediately absorb it, and we start to feel it, and I think it's our own anxiety that makes us want to fix it. Because if we can fix that problem for them, we don't have to tolerate their anxiety and what they're going through. So it's usually for ourselves that we're trying to help them resolve some problem. And they need to be able to talk about something and be able to have some space. We need to open up space for them to be able to think about their own problems and think about how to solve them. I'm going to teach you something called mirroring or reflective listening. I don't know how many of you have practiced this before, but mirroring is the process of accurately reflecting back to somebody something that they have said. It's reflecting back either the content of what your child has said to you, or it is the emotion of what they've said. You know, you can think of yourself, I think of it as sitting on a porch in a farmhouse in a rocking chair and pretending like you're Columbo and just trying to listen and see what's going on with them, because that's a lot of what they need. So it's about repeating back to somebody what they're saying or what they're feeling. And I'm going to ask somebody in the audience to just talk to me while I show you how to do reflective listening. So is there anybody who would like to tell me, just say a sentence about how their day was today? Somebody just tell me anything. Sure.
My day was anticipatedly hectic when my car wouldn't start in a public place.
Wow. So you went out today and your car wouldn't start?
Right, I lost 2.5 hours out of my day,
Oh, that's a lot. You lost 2.5 hours.
which was playing for other things.
So that made it hectic.
Yes, it did.
So what did you do?
I got out my AA card, bought a newspaper, and waited for the guy to come.
You did. So it sounds like you made yourself pretty happy after being really frustrated.
That was active. And I got a chance to read the newspaper, which I enjoyed.
So it was efficient. Okay, so you got something. Get that? That's reflective listening, emotions and content. Okay, so I want you to be next to somebody, close enough to talk to them, in twos, because I'm going to just give you one little exercise. So you guys are together, all right? And I want the person on the left to say to the person on the right a statement, and I want the person on the right to reflect back to the person on the left 3 or 4 times, because I want you to figure out what is really going on with this person losing somebody. Okay? So the statement on the left-hand side that I want you to say to the person this person is, the college process is.
You just saying that?
And you tell her how you feel about it.
Oh.
And then I want the other person to reflect. What's going on with you in the college process? How you feel about it? I'm teaching you how to do this with your children. Yes.
Effectiveness training.
I said, but my response is, very effectiveness training to the course.
So you can reflect back here, so you feel like this is very effective training.
No, at the time I said, I just said that. So she would reflect back, I just said that. Now, your turn to say something. So well, I read the book.
That's pretty funny.
Well, here's the question.
I got all out of order.
Okay, shut them on.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm really sorry, but I'm going to interrupt you now. How many of you were actually able to do that exercise and not give your opinion about something? Do you get a sense of what it feels like to do it? And to really let your kids, because one of the most important skills we can give our children is the ability to process their emotions, because children are where they are now in adolescence, they are hardwired to be emotional, okay? They are hardwired to be emotional. And if we can teach them to process their emotions without reacting to their emotions, that is the greatest gift we can give them to get through life, because we can't get in trouble with emotions. We only get in trouble with the behavior around emotions. So if we can help them process emotions, it's a really, really healthy thing for them to learn, to not have to react. And the way to do it is to be able to talk about it. If somebody listens to you about what you're thinking and what you're feeling, you can sort of process those things through and not react. Another tool that we're going to talk about is called reframing, okay? And reframing is a way of trying to change thinking patterns and to not catastrophize. We can communicate with adolescents around college issues and have an impact. Reframing helps to give them perspective, and it's a learned skill. A person holding a gun to our head is a genuine crisis, but a C on a chemistry exam, it's not a genuine crisis. When children blow stressors out of proportion, they may undermine their chances for success by having a lot of anxiety. And some children are more hardwired for anxiety than other children are. But if you have a lot of anxiety, instead of being alert, you're scattered, unfocused, and too nervous to study at all. Every child has his own lens through which he sees the world, depending on temperament and life experience. Even within the same family, siblings can share an identical experience, but interpret it in an entirely opposite way. The patterns that adolescents use to interpret events are important to understand because they strongly affect a child's resilience and competence. How does this relate to the college process? As they grapple with all the demands in their lives, they can become more resilient if they can think in positive patterns. Okay? If they don't, they can become pessimistic and anxious. So if we can show them how to use their thought process to address issues realistically, we can enhance their growing sense of competence. But we can only do this if we distress and decatastrophize ourselves. Martin Seligman has studied resilience in the face of adversity, and he's worked with hundreds of families, and he says that people are better able to cope with life by changing the way they think about problems. We don't have to be self-defeating thinkers, and neither do our children. So we need to reflect and reframe an accurate rather than a catastrophic storyline. What's really happening? Okay, resilient people can distinguish when they have control over a situation and when they do not, when something will pass easily or with difficulty. They are able to talk themselves down when they start to magnify events, and we can teach our young people to rein in and rethink impulsive thoughts that fly through their minds and can control their responses. We do this all the time, and we need to do it around the college application process. We do it when somebody says they were in a car accident. What do we say? At least nobody was hurt. And that's the kind of thing that we can do with our kids when something goes wrong. We also wanted to do, here we go, a couple of reframing exercises. So just think about how you would restate this. Now, number one, you always want to validate and if a child's emotional, that's not the time to do the reframe. After you have validated an emotion, then you can reframe a sentence so that maybe a child can look at it differently, because this is going to go on as you go through this process. You're going to find that this ramps up. Susie got into X school, early decision. They will never take more than one of us from the same school. Can you answer?
Sure. Honey, we don't know. I can see that you're upset about this, and I know that there's no special formula that the schools have. But you know what? You have a great range of schools, and you will get in somewhere. It's okay. It's going to be okay.
Okay. I got a C- on my history test. I can't believe I did so poorly. I studied so hard. If I don't drop the class, I will never get into college. Can anybody think of a way to reframe that? All right. You want to do it? You want me to?
Maybe you do.
How about, I can see you're upset. Oh, I can see you're upset. Let's sleep on it and see what some of our options might be in the morning. All right?
It must be disappointing for you, given how hard you worked.
That's a great one. That's a great one. That's a great one. Okay, how about the last one? I was cut from my varsity soccer team.
You've got your weekend free.
That's right. I know you're upset. But let's see what else we can do with this free
Now
time.
you have all that time to apply to college.
What were you going to say?
I would say, you could say something like, I know that's a huge disappointment. You had a lot of friends on the team, but
Mhm.
look at this other person who got cut from the varsity soccer team and is doing wonderfully on the cross-country team.
There you go. There you go.
How about number 3?
I have so much work to do. The amount of homework is ridiculous. I can't believe I have my worst 2 exams on the same day. I know I'm going to fail. Anybody want to reframe that?
Oh.
Yeah.
At least we'll get them over with on the same day.
It's I love that. Humor, too. We always say to use humor.
You had another idea too?
I was going to say, the nice thing about the exams, I know in Darien that they end by 12:30. That gives you time, more time in the afternoon to study.
There you go. Okay. Okay.
I see it.
You know, I would say, you know, if you budget your time studying for each one, and usually generally some exams only count not that huge a portion of your final total grade. Colleges don't see the exam grade, and usually an exam is such that it can bump your grade from B+ to A- if you do well, but if you don't do so well, and you have a lot of other class participation, it may not even bump your grade down. So sometimes exams will bump up and just keep the same.
I mean, and I think you have to know your child and what they're going to respond to. But I think one thing that you're all showing is calm and not getting on the roller coaster. So all of you, you know, and of course, we're not in the heat of the moment with the child who's hysterical or the child who is uncommunicative either. So, but I think that it's just good to remember to be able to reflect back to them in some ways so that they can de-escalate a little bit.
Okay. The next thing that I would remind you to do is to focus on their strengths, all right? And try to focus on their character traits. Not the fact that they got an A on an exam or they won a sports or got a B on an exam, but the fact that they might have worked hard. I think that if I asked all of you what you wanted for your children, you would probably tell me you want them to be kind and compassionate and hardworking and honest and responsible. And if we asked our children what we thought they wanted from us, I'm not so sure what they would say. And I think that that disconnect is a really important thing to try to bridge. So we can say to them, jeepers, it was really kind that you helped your sister, or it was really considerate that you called your grandmother. Those kinds of things that are character traits for them. Try to catch them being good also, because it's really easy to give your kids 4 or 5 negative, feedback statements a day. You didn't do this, or please stop texting, or why didn't you take out the garbage, or all sorts of things we can ask them. And it's nice to instead say, thank you for taking out the garbage, and it was nice to have you present at the dinner table tonight. Let them know how special they are, okay? Try to use I statements, which I think you probably all know about. Give them space, get out of their way. Give them emotional space during this process, and also during all the stress they're feeling in high school. That means they don't have to respond to you immediately. Give them some time on their own to sort of process what's going on in their life. Give them physical space around the college application process. And for Debbie and I, that has always meant don't put all the college stuff in the middle of their desk or in the middle of your desk. Let it have its own place so that it doesn't spread through their whole lives day in and day out. The other thing is to ignore the sideline chatter. I am telling you, if you listen to what everybody says, you will be sick to your stomach. There's constant chatter, okay? And a lot of it is wrong. So try to not let that alarm you. Give your child a good idea when it is time to ask for help. Ask them if they need it. And if you find yourself completely overwhelmed by this process and intervening in your child's life about it all the time, if you can and you can find a place to do it or a way to do it, get yourself some professional help around this process. Respect your child's privacy and your own. I mean, does your child want you to publicly discuss their GPA or their SAT scores? Does your child want you to publicly discuss his friends or her friends' SAT scores? That's a little like asking somebody how much they're making or what their raise just was. Encourage their decision-making skills. This is how we learn. We learn from making decisions. I found a Michael Jordan quote today. I don't know if you've heard it. He said, "I missed 9,000 shots in my career. I lost 300 games, and 26 times I lost the winning shot. And that's how I succeeded." So remember that for our children. Let them control as much of the process as they can. This will help them build their confidence. But don't let them get stuck. As I said before, if they need help, ask them if they need help. Turn off the parent alarm. Sometimes no response is the best response. Don't make the only conversation in your house revolve around the college process. And that's a really hard thing to do when they are in the heights of getting recommendations and having to mail things out and signing up for SATs. Another thing that we've done is to say, okay, Sunday night from 5 to 6, we're going to sit down with the checklist. And some children need more organization and more help than others. And some kids are completely self-sufficient. And I've had them run the gamut. I had the, 10 seconds to 12 the night of the deadline, all the way to it's already done. It was done beforehand. But from 5 to 6 at night on a Sunday night, that might be the time to sit down and go through the college checklist once a week. The hard part of that is that on Tuesday you think of something you want to say and you have to have the self-control to wait. So I suggest writing it on a piece of paper and sticking it in a folder that's in that place.
And I want to add something to that because we have implemented that in my house. And now at 4:35 on Sundays, my son finds something he absolutely has to do to get away from us. So it's not foolproof.
And also you can sort of not look forward to it.
Yeah.
Maintain your sense of humor. Most of all, maintain your sense of humor. And remember that you are role modeling how adults handle stress all the time. Your kids are going to see how you do this, and it's a learning experience for them. For yourself, stop feeling guilty. Avoid the, am I a good enough parent? Oh, I should have signed her up for ballet in the 1st grade, or I didn't tell her to do this in the 7th grade, or I didn't get her on the fast track in the 8th grade. I mean, it is what it is, and try not to go through all that self-recrimination. Avoid the big buildup that college was the best 4 years of your life, because I'm probably older than most of you, and I can tell you that when I went, I didn't have a lot of, well, let me just talk about these kids. They have a lot of freedom. A lot of them have their own bedroom. All right, they have their own bathroom, and they've been able to stay out late, and they have a lot of good friends. They have really good friends, and they stay in contact with their good friends when they go off to college. So they miss home. At least that was my experience with my kids. My kids missed home. I think when I went off, it was a whole new adventure because there were so many things that I wasn't allowed to do. So that to live in a 9-by-12 room with some stranger I didn't know seemed perfectly all right. And I'd had a younger sister and an older sister in my bedroom. But I think kids have it's a different experience these days for them. So try not to build it up too much.
Also, you don't want them to be disappointed that they're not having as good a time as you had.
Yeah.
I was going to add something on an impression that my daughter got. She's on Facebook, like every most people, and she looks at her friends that are already in college. She's a senior now, so she looks at all of her friends' pictures from Facebook of college, and she says, oh, they look like they're having a great time. And then come to find out, some of them are transferring.
Yes.
So I might not say, well, college is going to be 4 years wonderful. That's the impression she's getting from Facebook.
Right. Well,
And
that's
then
Facebook.
Eventually you find out, oh, so-and-so's transferring because she hates it. So
Right.
they're getting that, whether I say anything about how wonderful college is going to be for 4 years, they might be thinking
Yes.
it's all wonderful based on Facebook.
Right.
But in reality, kids
Right.
are transferring,
Right.
they're not happy, they don't like it,
Yeah.
they don't like whatever.
To your point, there was actually a piece on NPR about 2 months ago, and that happens not just going to college, but with jobs. That kids now are you might know I wrote letters when I was their age, but you might know, I'm dating myself, but you might know what 100 people are doing. So there are always going to be people that have that perfect job out there. You might know what 500 people are doing with social, media and networking. So there's always people that have that job that's more than what you wanted, or it's a better job, or it's more exciting. So it's easier to feel disappointed.
What were you going to say?
The issue with sideline chatter is that oftentimes you can't hear it, you're not in a position to hear it. Can you give me some examples of what dangerous sideline chatter is going on that's supposed to be ignored? Because I'm like, I get a big blank in terms of what that actually means.
Oh, I think I would use, for example, I would use almost, and a lot of people do this, I'm not saying that you shouldn't, but you'll say, oh, if you go to so-and-so who teaches the SAT course, they're the best ones to go to. And they raised my daughter's score 300 points. And then you come home and you're like, oh my God, who are they? Why didn't I sign up for them? I've never heard of them. You call your friend up. Did you hear about the Joneses in Trumbull? You got to drive all the way to Trumbull who teach the SAT course, and it's the best SAT course around. Traffic. And my God, and by the time that gets passed around, the score's up 600 points, and he got into Yale or Harvard, and it's a lot of that.
So it's among parents.
Yes.
It's parents.
Okay.
Oh, it's parents.
Oh no, the
Kids have their own chatter. Kids have their own, but parents do, and they compare and they contrast, and and that's also when some of that information that gets passed about our children, where somebody's talking about a kid's GPA, and and things people well, but it happens, and it's just something to be aware of. I mean, it's like there's nothing I think about my kid being on the soccer field and watching and thinking, what are those parents actually talking about? They're really not watching the game.
Well, and you need to prepare your children too for being asked what their SAT and GPA are, because that will happen to them. Okay, and so they have to decide: do I want to answer that question? Do I not want to answer that question? Because it's also a way of teaching them. I mean, all of this is such a life, or so many life skills to learn, because it's teaching them to set boundaries. What questions do you answer? What questions don't you answer about yourself? You don't have to answer questions if you don't want to.
When I was driving the car, and my daughter and her friend was in the car, and she was asking her, what did you get? What was your score? And we had discussed it. I said, it's something you shouldn't discuss. But she kept saying, was it this much? Was it above this number? Was it below that number? And so finally she and I'm sitting there, I didn't want to jump in and ignore, jump in and control the whole thing, so I let it play out. But she beat my daughter down. She got that number out of her. She got the PSAT score because my daughter just couldn't hold her own against her.
That's
relentlessly.
That's tough, though. That's tough.
Yeah.
But I try to explain you shouldn't discuss it at all.
Well, and I think it's a personal decision with the family and with kids. You know what I'm saying? It's all a personal decision, but I think at the end of the day, it's not our information to be sharing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's their information, it's their life, it's, but I think that it's, and it's hard in those situations not to jump right in and say to the other kid, nope, that's not the way we do it in our family, because that's humiliating to a teenager. Oh great, we now have to hear the lecture on our family values with my friend. Doesn't work so well. So, I think that it's things to be more conscious of, and it's things to be aware of where you're hearing that stuff. One of the guidance counselors at my school said, just walk away when that kind of stuff starts going on. We can't do it when you're strapped into a seat in a car, but in a captive audience. But it can be challenging sometimes, and it gets us upset, to be honest, I think.
So we thought we'd have some questions and answers. Why don't you just flip to the last slide and leave it up?
Okay.
We're actually at 8, so we'll be here. But anybody have any questions or comments, or anybody want to share any experiences that might be helpful to somebody else in the room?
I think one of the things I see, because I have a component of my business that sort of touches on this, is I see so many kids who have an idea of what their major area of study is, but they really know nothing about what it takes to be successful or what skill sets they have that really apply to that. And I encourage parents to work with their kids as well. If they want to be a physician, have you talked to a physician to ask them what it's really like to be in business as a physician today?
Yeah.
Because it's not all saving people's lives like you see on ER or whatever the show is. You have administrative capabilities and regulations and continuing ed and staffing, and your reimbursements are getting cut back, and there's a lot of doctors that really don't like being doctors.
Right. You know,
That's just-
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say that's a very good point, and I was thinking two things about it. One is that that's a kid trying on who am I going to be, on the one hand, and on the other hand, it also, I mean, it could be very, very, you could look at it as a very healthy thing to be doing, but it could be trying on different hats, and it also could be feeling the need to say what they're going to be when they quote unquote grow up. So it could be part of that also. But it's a point. How do they know? It's not easy to know.
I wanted to be a doctor until I hit organic chemistry, and my professor was a guy who lost part of his hand to shrapnel in Vietnam, and after my second explosion in the lab, he said, "Tom, you know, maybe business might be a better venue." That was a wake.
He had a good sense of humor, yeah.
You had a question over here?
Taking the other side of that question, what if you have a child that doesn't really know what they want? How do you sort of start that process?
And that's a much more common thing to see. Has anybody else had that experience that can share?
Could you repeat it?
Oh, she asked, what if you have a child that's on the other end of the spectrum and doesn't really know what they want to do or what they want to be, and probably doesn't care a whole lot about it, which would be totally appropriate for the prefrontal cortex development, but how does somebody else, go ahead.
I'm operating long distance with my granddaughter, and she was so stressed because she had no idea what she wanted to be. And the need to affirm her, that was probably very wise, and wasn't she lucky? Because she had the opportunity to experience all of her freshman and sophomore year. She didn't have to make any decisions about a major. She was like 3 major decisions down the calendar. I mean, she was making decisions as if she was 22 years old instead of 17 years old. There was no reason to go that deep. And, you know, then I did some, you know, probably bad things in terms of telling stories about other people that I thought would be reassuring to her. Like, you know, when I went to college, it was the space race, and I had all these friends who were going to be rocket scientists, literally. And of course, none of them could add and subtract. They all ended up either flunking out or becoming sociology majors. And they wasted a lot of time and money in a fool's errand. And then it was perfectly okay to wait. And in fact, I think it produces happier outcomes.
It's a good reframe. It's a good reframe to say, you know, how you get your freshman and sophomore year to think about you get another couple of years to think about what it is you want to do. I mean, that's a good way to put it.
I also think, and if you're talking, are you talking about in high school or, okay, because what I was going to say is that, first of all, they all kind of get there. And kids are at different paces at different times. You have to remember, temperament's really different. I have one who was like laser, like I'm doing everything, I'm going for it, and I have one who's like, I'm not doing anything the way she did it. That's how he based his high school career, was he wasn't going to do anything the way his sister did it. And I'm like, this is a really healthy way to start high school. But I think that the point is that, you know, they're in a developmental process, and you know what, it's really hard for a 16-year-old boy sometimes to know what they want to do, you know, or, you know, a 17-year-old girl. It doesn't matter. I think that it's sitting back and not being panicked that they won't know. But I think that it's a process, and I don't know how old your children are, but there's a huge difference between 9th grade and 11th grade, and there's a huge difference between 11th grade and the beginning of senior year. They're being asked to do an awful lot, and they're growing and changing an awful lot, and I think we have to be cognizant of those developmental changes, which is why we talk about this too. And the range of normal is huge, and what ends up happening is we start feeling like, well, that person's kid knows exactly what they want to do. Well, that's fine, and some people are born with passion and they know what they want to do and they're very guided, and most of us are not. Most of us, you know.
It's also, you know, you could find out a little bit about how he or she feels about it by just saying, what's it like to not know what you want to do, when it seems to be there's so many people that do, and that's sort of a way of coming alongside and validating that feeling. You know, how are you feeling about it? Yes.
I guess the high school students that you've spoken to, how do you explain to them that as much as you want them to go to a school that is the right fit, that how do you say to them, it's no matter where you go, it's okay, and no matter what, you know, whether it's Norwalk Community College or Harvard, it's okay, and beyond that,
whoever, you know, I point out to my kids all the time, look at this, you know, there's a mom and dad I talked to who was concerned about the college process. She didn't go to college. And look at her, she's a functioning adult who's raising 2 wonderful kids. She didn't go to college. Who is that mom? He said it doesn't matter. And that's the point. I was still trying to explain to my kids, it doesn't really matter where you go. What you do when you're there and what you do afterwards. But I can say that until I'm blue in the face. I would say they go to that building, whatever high school they go to, and they get in that building, it's where you live, where you live, where you go.
Yeah.
How to get them beyond that?
You know, in some ways, you have to validate that feeling, that they're feeling that pressure. Okay, and then you do your reframe. You validate it and say, you know, I can see why you're feeling a lot of pressure, because there are people who really consider the name to be really, really important. But for me and for our family, this is how we feel about it. But if you've got a child that's feeling that kind of pressure, I once again think the best thing you can do is come up right alongside of them and say, sometimes it must feel crummy to feel like everybody, you know, is going X, Y, and Z and you're not, or you feel like it's really important and you may not be able to attain it, because you're sort of accepting them where they are at that moment. And then you can reframe it and say, it's not how I feel, but I understand that might be the way you feel.
And so remember, you're coming at it with an adult perspective, which is once they're there and they're with all the people who go to that school, right, they're part of that environment. Until they get there, sometimes it's hard to see that, you know. But it's hard sometimes because, if they don't want to see it, you can't make them, you know. So.
I just went through it. One piece of advice I can say is that my daughter asked me really not to talk about it with my friends. I thought my friends in this community were relentless, and some of it was just they're trying to gather their own information, and it's not because they were trying to gossip.
No.
But the minute I would say my daughter asked me not to talk about it, it was the best out for me. And she really, because she didn't want the situation where if I told everyone she was applying to these schools and she didn't get into anyone, that she would be a failure. So she gave me the best advice.
Well, it's hard to argue that, too.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one thing for you to say, we don't talk about that, because that might put somebody on the defensive. But, you know, my daughter's asked me to keep it private. I have to respect that. And that's part of that, maintaining your relationship with your child. That really is important. I give you a lot of credit. It's not easy.
Do you have any advice on the subject of managing expectations that are based on finances? And I think it's particularly true in environments where there are some people who have no financial limitation whatsoever and other people who are severely financially limited. And you know, you have a child who probably could get into any school in the country, but not on a scholarship if they were able to pay full boat. And that is simply not going to happen.
Right.
And how is it that you gently and compassionately take care of that child so that child does not get some severe disappointment at the end, when the end was very, very predictable? You know you're not going to go to a $500,000 a year school in art history, you know, and that's the way it goes.
Well, I don't want to step into guidance counselor territory, but I do know that, at least I know in Westport they talk about it. But, you know, managing expectations are, and this is from a parental point of view, you need to be upfront. And, you know, you have to have an honest conversation with the child. This is part of becoming an adult. There are things that we can afford, and there are things we can't afford. And it's disappointing, and it's upsetting, and it's hard. But I think that being upfront with a child, rather than letting them go there, is really hard. I know how hard you've worked. I wish we could. That's really hard, and that's a really hard conversation to have. But I know that the guidance counselors will say over and over again, if you don't want them going to California because you can't afford to fly them home, you need to have that discussion up front. We don't want to limit them completely, but that's not saying I don't want you to leave for California, but it's saying we can't, you know, if you go to California, you're going to come home twice a year because we can't afford it. And I think that those are very difficult conversations for parents to have. But I think managing expectations, you can't let the expectations get out of control to begin with. Because I think you're doing mop-up after that, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's worse, yeah.
It makes it worse if you're not straightforward about it. So.
There's a piece in the Journal over the weekend on the purpose of college.
Yeah.
If you saw that. So I distributed this to the 10th grader. She had no interest in it. But I'm spending a lot of time looking at really the efficacy of the university's system today. You know, looking at $250,000 per child for the art history or whatever, looking at the unemployment rates.
Yeah.
I have a friend who's got a job in Boston, Trader Joe's, and says, it's great, I'm meeting all these guys who just graduated from Harvard. Working next to me.
Right.
So okay, maybe this is sideline chat,
Right.
but it's real.
No,
So-
but that's actually a new dynamic in the last couple of years that didn't exist now, is that the kids are having such a hard time getting out that you're having, parents are now saying, and not only are we going to manage where you're going to college, but now we're going to manage what you're going to major in, because it needs to be something that's employable on the other end. And it's really hard, it's very tough on these kids. It's very tough, and it's a good point.
But what a great exercise to go through to teach a child. This is what we're looking at. This is how I'm evaluating it. I realize it's not all science, but it's still, you know, it's a way of teaching a child, this is how we look at this. This is how we look at things, to see whether it's worth it or not worth it, or what the outcome might be, just to gather that kind of information.
I had a parent say to me the other day, talk about sideline chatter, I want my son to major in accounting. And I looked at her, he's 16. And I said, is he good with numbers? She goes, oh, he's terrible with numbers, but at least he can get a job. And I'm thinking, oh my God, he's gonna end up in jail. But it was kind of that funny, like, I'm really encouraging him to be an accountant. And I'm thinking, really? It was just kind of a funny conversation. But so that chatter has changed, I think, as a result of the economy too.
There was also a great article in the Wall Street Journal today that my husband passed on. It said, "Dear graduating class of 2012."
Oh.
You guys should Google it. It's kind of about resilience and how a lot of these kids are they're going for their GPA and they're not going for their like character building, and how
Right.
not as resilient as they probably
Should be.
for practical purposes. That's great.
That's, and those are for kids who are graduating from high school or
I
college?
think it was more geared towards the college kids,
Right.
but I think there was parts of it that you could.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, you know, it's like a vicious cycle. So if we're graduating from high school not prepared, they're not necessarily going to college and getting that guidance either, so.
Anybody else have any comments to share with everybody? Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.